quick biblical theology study on sweat in the Bible. It shows up for the first time in Genesis 3, verse 19. This is in the passage that we often call the curse. Now, in our podcast episode on this passage, I address why it's not really a curse in the same way that we usually think of it. Only two entities are cursed in this, and humanity is not one of them. But while God is pronouncing judgment on the man and the woman, he says to the man, "In the sweat of your face you will eat bread till you return to the ground, because out of it you were taken, you are dust, and unto dust you will return." Now, sweat in the Bible doesn't show up much at all. But when we get into the Levitical laws, we find that any kind of leakage outside of our body, if I can put it that way, is considered unclean. It happens with blood. Blood is really important. It needs to be inside your body. If blood gets outside of your body, that's probably not good. So it's considered unclean in the Levitical laws. Now we have to understand that unclean does not mean sinful. That is a very common misunderstanding. But unclean just means this made you ritually unable to participate in the temple or tabernacle gatherings. Tabernacle at the time of Moses, temple later on at the time of Solomon. So it's not saying that you're sinful if you get a paper cut, and now you're bleeding. But it was saying you would not be able to participate in their temple gatherings at the time. This was true even for sexual fluids, both male and female. This is why a woman was considered unclean on her period. It wasn't anything moral. It was just that something is coming out of your body, and usually stuff is supposed to stay in our body. So from an ancient mindset, if it came out when it was supposed to be in, that was unclean. Sweat is never specifically said to be an unclean substance in the Bible, but I think the implication is there, particularly in Ezekiel 44. And this is kind of an obscure passage, but it's important for this study. In Ezekiel 44, 17 to 18, the Bible reads, "It will come to pass that when they enter in at the gates of the inner court, they will be clothed with linen garments, no wool will be on them, while they minister in the gate of the inner court and within. They will have linen bonnets on their heads." Now that's just talking about a head covering. "And will have linen breeches on their loins. They will not gird themselves with anything that causes sweat." So this is talking about a future temple that Ezekiel was receiving a vision of. And in that temple, the priests would be wearing these clothes. That's what this particular passage is about. And notice that it says that the priests will not be wearing anything that causes them to sweat. Basically, ancient moisture-wicking material is what these priestly garments would have to be made out of. Now, why would that be important? Well, I think it's because the implication is that sweat is a result of the failure in the garden. It is unclean. It is a reminder that we are in a post-Eden world, that things aren't the way that they're supposed to be. And when you're in the temple, that's like a little mini Eden. So things are supposed to be back like when we were in Eden, when we didn't sweat. So there would be no sweat in the temple, since we're trying to make it like a picture of Eden. It's interesting, but you say, what's the big deal? Well, there's one other time, only one other time in the entire Bible that the word sweat shows up. It's in the New Testament, Luke 22, verse 44. "Being in agony, Jesus prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling to the ground." So sweat, considered to be an unclean substance, was like blood, also another unclean substance outside of the body, pouring down from Jesus as he agonized in the garden before his death. If you read this in connection with Matthew 27:29, talking about the crown of thorns on Jesus' head, I think we're supposed to see Jesus as reversing the effects of the curse. What was another part of the judgment on humanity? Not just sweat, but that the ground would bring forth thorns and thistles. Thorns. What was the crown that Jesus crowned with made of? Thorns. So I really think the gospel authors are trying to tell us that Jesus is the reversal of the curse, and that he's actually getting us back to Eden at a time when life was literally no sweat and when there were no thorns. This is how the Bible works, and it is so awesome. Just these little narrative hyperlinks spread throughout these obscure passages. Well, maybe not Genesis and Luke being so obscure, but the Ezekiel one is. And it helps us to see the overarching message of the Bible, that Jesus came to reverse the curse and bring us back to Eden. That's awesome.